This is Jim Williams with the Hurricane City Tropical Update for September 2nd, 5:30 p.m. Here's the graphical tropical weather outlook from the National Hurricane Center. We have Hurricane Earl approaching the Outer Banks of North Carolina. We have Tropical Storm Fiona, which is hanging on, believe it or not, despite all the shear and the outflow from Hurricane Earl. And we have Gaston out here that became a tropical storm earlier today and weakened to a tropical depression. Now it's a remnant low. And the National Hurricane Center is indicating this will move off to the west and remain as a very weak system, remnant low. We also have a new area that just came off Africa. There's a 10% chance of development of that. That could be the next invest we'll watch down the road. But we're not going to talk about these three systems right now because all eyes are on Hurricane Earl approaching the eastern seaboard. These systems here, we have a long time to watch, and there's probably not going to be much going on with at least Gaston and Fiona for next week or so. Yesterday I showed you the point of approach for Hurricane Earl, and they showed that the hurricane force winds were going to reach the Outer Banks of North Carolina near Cape Hatteras, and they indicated this would be a Category 3 hurricane as it passed off just to the east of Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. Inside the Aqua Circle would be sustained tropical storm force winds over eastern North Carolina. But now look at today's image. And it's pretty much the same, but we have a weaker system. We're talking a Category 2 hurricane, and the hurricane force winds more than likely will not make it on shore, the Outer Banks of North Carolina, and the sustained tropical storm force winds probably will, though, in the Outer Banks of North Carolina. Now, why would you think that that would happen? Let's take a look at the Hurricane Hunter fixes out there right now. They're flying around out there, and if we take the point of closest approach, which should be right in this position right here is the official forecast from the National Hurricane Center, and we go out the same distance from the center of the storm, which is right here where the white circle is, and we go out that distance, we're talking surface winds here 53 knots to around 60 knots at the point that would be passing over the Outer Banks of North Carolina, according to the hurricane hunters. So if this forecast track verifies, the Outer Banks will more than likely not receive sustained hurricane force winds. All right, now what about the Northeast? There's a lot of talk about this potentially impacting Cape Cod. Here's yesterday's forecast. Yesterday evening, the indications were that Martha's Vineyard might feel some some hurricane force winds inside this red circle. And Cape Cod would definitely feel sustained tropical storm force winds, including Nantucket Island and Martha's Vineyard. Now we look at today's image. It's a little bit closer to Cape Cod. We can see the hurricane force winds definitely affecting Martha's Nantucket Island out here, and portions of Cape Cod are under the hurricane force wind field. But what's important to note is 77 knots. We're talking Cat 1. Yesterday we were thinking Category 2 hurricane. And there's going to be very few areas of Long Island are going to have sustained tropical storm force winds for any length of time. This is going to be flying really fast. And let's go to the next image, which indicates what's going to happen in Nova Scotia. Yesterday, the indications were that we would have a Category 1 hurricane coming into southwestern Nova Scotia and going up into New Brunswick. And then you look at today's image, extratropical, meaning no hurricane force winds are expected in Nova Scotia, which is very good news. So the moral of the story of all this is that our plans for the live broadcast on HurricaneCity.tv for tonight in the Outer Banks is unlikely for a hurricane warning show because the hurricane force winds are going to remain east of the Cape Hatteras area as this approaches around 1 to 2 o'clock in the morning at its closest approach. There will be no coverage, no hurricane warning show unless things change. There will be no show on this. There will be sporadic broadcasts. We'll have some local media coverage from the Outer Banks and some webcams and weather maps and whatnot, but pretty much there won't be any recorded hurricane warning show. And the same goes for the Cape Cod area, although that would be tomorrow night, and that'll depend on the forecast track and how much Earl weakens between now and then, which is a possibility this could weaken all the way down. Now, we did talk about the potential for significant weakening. Let me pull up the floater loop of Hurricane Earl. And yesterday's update video, I talked about the potential that this was becoming an annular hurricane, meaning a very wide circle eye that takes up a good part of the hurricane would be the eye itself, and then the surrounding areas would be hurricane force winds. That did not materialize. The eye shrunk once again. The system strengthened in the morning, and now it's in a weakening trend, and the eye has popped out here once again, but it's a very small eye, and this will continue to weaken as it moves off to the north-northeast and stays offshore Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, which is very good news because annular hurricanes generally can fight off wind shear and stay stronger for much longer periods of time, but this is not an annular hurricane, and it just never really materialized. It looked like it was beginning to happen. Now here's the radar of Hurricane Earl approaching, and you can see that the outer eye wall bands are beginning to show up in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. And again, this will pass very near the outer banks in the wee morning hours, but again, there will more than likely not be a hurricane warning show for this event. Now, this is an interesting image. This is the forecast projections of the close-up model map at Hurricane City, and this is going back to Sunday, August 29th. Now, which model predicted this was going to happen? The best performing model, looking back all the way to the 29th, which was Sunday, is the Canadian model. Look at this. It had it pretty much the outlier model here, south of Cape Hatteras, and then hanging a northeast turn here and heading up in this general direction. So the Canadian model even outperformed the Euro right here for getting this pretty close to the outer banks of North Carolina. So lots to be said going out. This was about 5 days ago. The Canadian model, the CMC, had this closer to the outer banks of North Carolina. So what does the Canadian show for today? The Canadian keeps it offshore Cape Cod, and takes it into Nova Scotia, and it should be an extratropical storm at that time. So we're going to go based on the Canadian model, and that takes it into Nova Scotia as an extratropical system, extratropical storm, and offshore of Cape Cod, Massachusetts. So this is turning into a good news story for everybody up and down the eastern seaboard. Not to say there's not going to be damage and high winds, but it's not going to be the hurricane force, especially the major hurricane force winds that were anticipated yesterday. All right, here's the hurricane force wind field probabilities, and you can see if we zoom in on this that the North Carolina Outer Banks, about a 35 to 40% chance of hurricane force winds affecting the Outer Banks of North Carolina, and it lowers significantly up here for Cape Cod. We're talking 20 to 25% for Cape Cod and Nantucket Island. Nantucket Island is a little bit higher here, about 35% chance, and there's very little chance of it happening in Nova Scotia, which is excellent news. And again, the cooler sea surface temperatures, let me show you those. These are the sea surface temperatures of the Atlantic, and if we pan this image out, you'll see that right here in the green areas right near the North Carolina-Virginia border, these are temperatures below 78 degrees. A hurricane needs 78 degrees or warmer sea surface temperatures to survive, and it's going to hit these cooler sea surface temperatures. Not only that, but we have a trough coming in from the west that's going to increase the southerly wind shear and just rip this thing to shreds. So what can you expect if you live along the mid-Atlantic coast? Well, here are the highest wind speed probabilities expected right now based on the latest forecast from the National Hurricane Center using the HurTrack program. Cape Hatteras could have gusts up to 80 knots, and that's if the eye wall comes on shore, which looks like that's unlikely. Chatham, Massachusetts could have the worst out of this, 81 knot winds, and that would be in Saturday in the early morning hours. Ocracoke Inlet, 74 knots. Oregon Inlet, 72 knots. Woods Hole, North Carolina, 70. That's Massachusetts, rather, 70 knots. And Eastport, Maine, 65 knots. And Cape Lookout, North Carolina, on south. All these areas, Bar Harbor, Maine, North Carolina, Virginia state line. All these areas, tropical storm force gusts, but no hurricane force winds. All right, here's the water vapor loop of the Atlantic Basin, and we have our system Earl approaching the mid-Atlantic coast, but here comes the scoop. You can see the cold front moving in here. The scoop is in Arkansas and Illinois right now, cruising very fast off to the east, and it's already beginning to push Earl a little bit east of north right now. And once this scoop comes in, it's going to drag this system very quickly off to the northeast, and it's going to start shredding it. Along with the cooler sea surface temperatures, this system will become extratropical very quickly, according to the National Hurricane Center. Here's Fiona getting sucked into Earl's outflow here. Most of the models indicate this is going to dissipate near Bermuda. Here's Gaston, basically got shredded out here today, but due to a lot of dry air getting pulled into the system. And that's basically what's happening out in the Atlantic right now. So that's it for now. We'll have coverage on HurricaneCity.tv, but there will not be any recorded hurricane warning show for this event unless the situation changes in late tonight, going in early tomorrow morning. That's it for now. Thank you again for visiting Hurricane City.